Hey everybody, it's been a little while. I haven't done a blog post since May, but tomorrow, the 27th of December, is my 2-year Maniversary, which is the day that I celebrate starting testosterone and kind of the, the real beginning as I see it for my own transition. So I thought it would be fun to do an update on what's happened just since May, but then also an update on when I started my transition, what my biggest fears were, and how that has all turned out so far. To talk about what some of the biggest challenges were and the most surprising aspects. And then also, if I can conjure up any advice in retrospect, if I could do it again, what would I do differently maybe? Um, so, first of all, since May, I started a new position with work, which has been a really transformative process. It provided for a few things. Number one, I think a better alignment with my work style and this company's values. So it's been really nice to feel that really good match. But in terms of my transition, one of the biggest challenges that I faced was what I call transitioning in place. So I didn't move to a different location. I didn't change jobs during the bulk of my transition. So every day I was encountering a ton of people who knew me prior to transitioning, and they were all trying to acclimate to what they perceived as being the new me. And that was just a lot of energy to deal with on a day-to-day basis. To every person that I was encountering every single day was like processing my identity, which made it difficult to process my own identity. So it was really nice to change jobs and have the majority of the people that I work with now did not know me prior to transitioning. It also allowed me to create a schedule that worked better with my life. It's pretty flexible in terms of the hours, and so I've lost 80 pounds since May, the bulk of which was after I started my new position. So there's a lot to be said for finding work that makes you feel fulfilled and that gives you a sense of belonging. I think that was really the piece that I was missing in my former job, and I think missing especially because it was a feeling that I had prior to transitioning that never came back after I made the announcement that I was transitioning. I always felt really alien and really separate from everyone else after that moment. So it's important to pay attention to those voices and to do something about it because my well-being definitely, there was definitely an impact on that. Obviously, like everybody else, and during this pandemic, right? So when I last blogged in May, it was just very much at the beginning of all of this chaos. And it has been, I think the silver lining is that it has provided a lot of time for reflection and kind of maybe more privacy than we usually get in our daily lives, right? I didn't have to see people every single day, which can be really stressful when you also observe your body and even your personality kind of changing on a daily basis as you become more yourself. And so when there's that constant feedback of other people around you, I found that to be really distracting. So it's been a little bit of a reprieve to have things shut down. I am anxious for those things to open back up and for life to get back to normal for sure. But I think it was like an unexpected benefit of life changing as we know it. Okay, so in terms of what my biggest fears were when I started my transition, I would definitely say that I was afraid that I would lose my marriage. And it was not something that I even had to think through thoroughly because, and this is a blog post in and of itself, but I didn't ever really come out to my wife. And what I mean by that is that we have we do a lot of our processing out loud. And so she was there for all of my incomplete thoughts around my identity when I just didn't really have the language for it and I didn't know what I was doing. And I definitely wanted to always wear men's clothing, and I definitely was extremely uncomfortable with the idea of being pregnant. I was definitely uncomfortable being pregnant. um, and not just physically because my pregnancy was intense, but just what it did to how I saw myself and my gender. Um, I shared with her, and she was maybe even the first person to ask me if what I wanted was not the breast reduction I was talking about, but if what I really wanted was top surgery. Um, and so I didn't ever really have to thoroughly process, like, what if this ends my relationship? Um, because she was there every step of the way. But I also am really cognizant of the fact that if there had been a moment when it seemed like I would lose my marriage as a result of the steps that I was taking to become myself, I don't think I would have had the courage or the strength to be able to go through with it. So I just really have a lot of compassion for the people who are in that position and how scary and challenging that is. And I really acknowledge how much privilege I have that my relationship was able to stay so secure. That didn't mean that there weren't moments. There was one point where we were driving to the gym together, and she said, I'm totally okay with you having top surgery and using male pronouns, but if you were to go on hormones, that would really be something different. And we just like left it there. And we got out of the car and we both worked out, and I was just sort of trying to stay really numb and not really process what that could possibly mean. And we didn't talk about it again until the next day, and all she said was, I said that it would be really different, but it really wouldn't be that different. And that was really all that needed to be said, so that I felt like I could do whatever made sense to me, whatever I needed, that she would still be there. And that has remained true, and I am extremely fortunate. The other big fear that I had was for my children, whether it would cause our relationships to be distant. I think that a lot of society portrays dads as being pretty uninvolved. So there was sort of that kind of societal view that I definitely did not want to um, maybe even accidentally let happen, right? I really want to be involved in my children's lives. I worried that my kids wouldn't feel as close to their dad as they had to their mom. Um, it was strange, especially for our youngest child, who I gave birth to and who I breastfed. And, we had a very maternal relationship. Like, could I ever really be his dad? And would there be a cost to that? And again, I am incredibly fortunate. But for my oldest son, it has been just such a non-issue. I remember about maybe 6 months into the process, he was having a friend come over that I hadn't seen for a couple of years. They used to play baseball together, right? And I knew that his family was really conservative and really religious, and I was really nervous about even being in the house when this kid came over, and like, what was he gonna think? What was he gonna tell his parents? What was that gonna be like for our oldest son? And I told our oldest son, I was like, if you refer to me as dad, like, it's going to raise questions, and if you need to not do that, like, I respect that, and if you want me to be somewhere else, like, it's totally fine. And he was like, I really don't think it's a big deal. And he really went out of his way to refer to me as his dad while his friend was over, and it really was not a big deal. So I really cherish his wisdom and his courage. Um, and I would say that we're actually closer now. I feel more comfortable relating to him as his father than I ever did as his mom. For the youngest, I couldn't believe how much it just made sense to him. Like, he just really got it. He understood that I was a boy, and that, like, why wouldn't I be a boy? That's so obvious, right? And kind of transforming into his daddy has been a really magical process. And I am certain that we are just as close as we were prior to my transition, and that we'll always have that bond, and that is not under threat at all. So that has all gone quite swimmingly. uh, even though that didn't diminish the amount of stress that it felt in the moment. My other biggest fear is that I would never ever pass, that I wouldn't ever appear to be a cis guy. Now, passing is not important to everybody, and it certainly should not be the metric by which we measure one another, but it was important to me. Um, and not ever because I didn't want people to know that I was trans. I don't think that was my main motivator, but I just wanted to be, um, for lack of a better word, I just wanted to be seen as normal. Um, it took a long time to get to a place where I was passing consistently, and even just the other day, it completely blew my mind. But I was in Target and somebody referred to me as ma'am, and I genuinely have no idea where that comes from, why that would be the impression, right? I do a blog post about the ways in which we gender one another where I ponder these things more in depth than I'm going to go into here, but um, I would say that except for those really random, rare circumstances where I don't know if it's because there was some pink in my shirt or because of my height or the fact that I haven't lost any of my hair, that I still have a really full hairline, which is really unusual for a man of my age. Whatever it is, um, except for those rare circumstances, I am read as a cis man, and it feels really validating. Um, in terms of the surprises, I did not realize the degree to which going on hormones would physically change my body. Um, I don't know if that's because I kind of downplayed what it meant for like fat redistribution to happen, um, or if my body just had kind of a strange reaction to going on hormones. Um, my hormone levels did get too high near the beginning of starting T, um, and there were a lot of physical impacts of that. One was that it felt like my calves grew 3 sizes one day. Like they just kind of exploded, and it was extremely painful. They just really bulked up, um, to the point where I wasn't able to run for probably about a year, actually. Just trying to work through that, and every time I would start to work out again, they would get all overexcited and get really bulky, and I couldn't stretch them out, and they were just always cramped up, and it was really challenging. Um, I also had just extreme hot flashes. I really struggled to get my hormone levels to a good place. It's pretty typical for guys to do their T shots once a week. My hormone levels are so sensitive that I actually do my shots twice a week, to try to keep everything as level as possible. So, in terms of any advice I have around that, if you're not feeling well, you should talk to your doctor. Um, I was worried that if I complained about it, that they would tell me that I couldn't be on it, or that it wasn't a good fit for me, or whatever. And that wasn't the experience that I had. So I guess I would just say, reach out. If you're not getting what you need from your doctor, like try to find another doctor. I know that that is can be really challenging. I'm surprised. Like I only live about 30 miles north of Seattle, but one of our hormone prescribers is no longer practicing, and the community is in like a total panic because there's such a shortage of doctors who can do this work. But nonetheless, really encourage you to advocate for yourselves. I also did not expect there to be such a large impact on not just my emotions, but the way that I emote. The way that people are able to read my emotions or not since starting T. I thought that a lot of the ways that men express their emotions was something that had been societally ingrained, and that I wouldn't go through that. That I had no desire to pursue like toxic masculinity, and therefore I would somehow be immune to some of these things that I had seen men doing. But couple of things. It is almost impossible for me to cry. Like it just, which was not the case pre-transition. I was definitely a crier, or at least in retrospect, it felt that way, right? I think I have maybe cried once or twice in the last 2 years. So that is really strange and it's difficult to get used to. It's weird when parts that feel really kind of intrinsic to who you are suddenly don't operate in the same way. It can be really disorienting. So, the other thing I would say is that certainly when I was adjusting to tea, the speed at which I went from totally fine to completely angry was really fast. Um, I just felt like that heat build so quickly. Um, and it was something that I definitely had to keep an eye on and to really work through and to do my best to like use my words. There was a point when my wife and I had to make an agreement that I got to just say, like, I can't remember, we had like a code word, which meant I acknowledge that I completely overreacted just now and I'd like to kind of have a do over. And we only had to do that for, a pretty short period of time in retrospect, where I got a little bit of grace to be like, I did not mean to say that. I'm going to try to rewind and reset. And she was really understanding, but it was definitely a struggle because it changed the dynamics of our relationship. I no longer responded the way that she expected me to respond, and that took, and then she didn't know how to read that either, right? So it took a lot of commitment to our relationship to talk through those things and for me to be vulnerable, which there are not a lot of examples of what male vulnerability looks like. So that was also really challenging. There was a point during this process when an online troll kind of latched onto me and was saying some pretty atrocious things and some really threatening, scary stuff. And one of the biggest challenges of that time was that I didn't have any kind of role model for how to experience fear as a man, how to feel physically threatened and process that like as a guy. So all of that has been really surprising that my prior experiences didn't have any useful information about how I should move through that. So my other tip would be to find a great therapist. I expected that my facial hair would come in fast and furious. Like, I was like, 5 years? Psh, that's ridiculous. Like, my father had a 1 o'clock shadow, just a super full beard, and it didn't matter how often he shaved it, it was back by 1 p.m., right? That has not been my experience. This is the bulk of what I got going on here. It took probably 18 months for my sideburns to like actually show up, right? And they're still a little thin. I'm still completely bald right through here, and my mustache is pathetic, so I shaved that thing. Um, but I didn't always shave it. As it was initially coming in, like, I cherished it, and it, in retrospect, looked ridiculous, right? But it didn't matter at the time. Like, I needed that little wisp of facial hair to feel like a valid person, and that is okay. And you can do all kinds of crazy things, and you can get some like beard growth oil and put that on your face, and other trans men might be like, that's ridiculous, right? But if it makes you feel valid, like, that's okay. If dyeing your facial hair makes you feel more confident, that is okay. This is your transition, and you can do it however makes sense to you. I think the most important thing during all of that tumultuous change is to seek out ways to validate your own gender and to feel confident. And so for some guys, that is wearing makeup that makes them feel more masculine, with the way in which it shadows your face and whatnot. For some guys, that's using Rogaine on their face, and whatever it is. There are some guys who have a lot of judgment around that, and other guys who do that. It doesn't matter. Whatever's working for you, just do it. The other thing that I was surprised about was I expected that my arm hair would get darker. I didn't realize that the growth pattern would change. And one day, like, I woke up and I had like a whole new stripe of arm hair, and that was surprising to me. So, heads up on that. I thought that because I wore men's clothing and I have a men's haircut, and that my voice dropped really quickly, that top surgery would mean that I would pass. And I was devastated when it had almost no effect whatsoever. I really thought that it was the size of my chest that made me so easily pegged, and it turned out that that wasn't the case at all. And that was really difficult to get through because I felt like I was doing so much to like physically change myself so people would understand who I was, and it didn't have any impact on how people read me at all. So that was extremely irritating and hard to get through. Also, my voice dropping didn't change that either. There are still times when people who I talk to on the phone will misgender me, and my voice like is categorically male, like in terms of the frequency at which I talk. But I think one of the reasons that people misgender me is because I also have a much more dynamic speech pattern than most cis men. And that's not something that I want to change, except for some days when I feel really sad about being misgendered, and then I'm willing to change just about anything, right? Okay. My name change. Couple things about that. So I changed to just a more masculine form of my birth name, and in retrospect, I may have done that differently. It is still, Jesse is still kind of a gender neutral name, and there are people who assume that Jessies are female, even though it is spelled in a masculine way, and it is really irritating. So there's that piece. And also, folks may not, like, until they see me and interact with me, if they knew my birth name and they see the name that I use now, which is my legal name, they don't always register that something has changed. We were refinancing our house the other night, and we were all wearing masks, and so I think that was kind of a contributing factor. But the person, the notary, was like, "Oh, I see that, you know, this used to be your name. How is it to change your name? Is it hard?" And I was thinking, like, I have no idea why we would be discussing this if you understood that I didn't just change my name, right? The other thing that's interesting about my name change is I changed my middle name to Fitzgerald, which people believe is a second last name for me. And I cannot tell you what a nightmare it has been to try to get all of my legal documents correct, because they often come back with my last name being Fitzgerald Jorstad, which is absurd and extremely frustrating. So a couple of things to think about if you're changing your name. I thought that I would really want my name to be extremely similar to my previous name because I have, you know, a reputation and I have kind of a professional presence, and I didn't want to lose those things that had been created under my previous name. But in retrospect, I might have done that differently. The only advice that I really have is, and I already talked about it a little bit, but it's to do what makes you feel good. And to remember that this pain that you're in is temporary, and it's not your fault. Almost all of the pain that you're in is because of society's view on gender and what gender means, and it being wrong. That there being just an inherent misunderstanding of what any of those things mean, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be neither, and how permanent those things are. And yeah, so try to give yourself grace, allow yourself to indulge in what makes you feel good, and don't beat yourself up about what isn't going well. You know, I felt extremely bad about myself because after I started my transition, I gained about 55, 60 pounds in a pretty short period of time. Part of that was because I had been running every day and I stopped, but a lot of that was kind of getting used to the new way in which I processed emotions, and needing to feel numb a lot through this process because of all of that external feedback that was constantly coming back of like watching other people try to figure out what on earth am I, right? And how should they behave around me, and what does my transition mean for them? It was pretty exhausting. But I think that my like feeling badly about that and about the weight gain as it was starting just perpetuated additional weight gain and just kind of dug that hole deeper and deeper and deeper. I feel really grateful to be back to a place where I feel healthy. I think this is maybe the most fit I've been in my adult life. So that is all to say that it gets better.